Gee, so Assalamu alaikum and very good morning to good afternoon to all of you. A warm afternoon, I must say. Yesterday was nice, in the evening especially. अच्छा जी, अब आप मुझे ये बताइए. I was planning to revise the nose with you since उसको मैंने ही पढ़ाया था. But it seems we have already done the anatomy, gross anatomy of the nose with Dr. Fatima. तो चलिए फिर मैं आपको olfactory nerve से और pharynx करवा देती हूँ. ठीक है? So this is what I planned. If you have any questions, even before anything regarding the substage, so just let me know before we start. Anything regarding the substage, the syllabus of the substage, anything. Nothing? Okay, if it is nothing, so muscles of the back. एक मिनट है, अच्छा. Just give me a minute. Just a minute, let me see. I'll read out the syllabus to you. Nose and the first cranial nerve, which is olfactory. Joints of the neck. Pharynx. Paranasal sinuses. Suboccipital triangle and hyoid bone. Pharynx. Tongue and hypoglossal nerve. Salivary glands. इसमें submandibular और sublingual gland है. Muscles of the back, बेटा suboccipital triangle में जो muscles हैं वो, और उस extensor muscles of the back उसके साथ मैंने करवाए थे आपको, मैंने खुद करवाए थे, ये टॉपिक मैंने खुद करवाया हुआ है आपको. Plus hyoid bone and the muscles I told you. I revised over and over again the muscles attached to the hyoid bone. You have to know them because सारा ही आपके syllabus में included है. और कुछ? अब आप मुझे बताइए, आप इस सारे syllabus में से I can either do एक तो मैं ये first cranial nerve करवाऊंगी आपको. I can either do the pharynx with you, or I can do, if you want, I can do the hyoid bone with you. Suboccipital triangle revise करवा दें. Okay, ma'am. ठीक है, suboccipital triangle करवा देती हूँ. Do you want the hyoid bone as well? What about the first cranial nerve? वो करनी है कि नहीं करनी है? Do you want me to revise the first cranial nerve? Okay, okay, ठीक है. I'll revise the first cranial nerve. Okay, fine, fine. देख लेते हैं जो भी इस सारे में हो सका, because obviously we just have 1 hour. First cranial nerve, also called the olfactory nerve. It starts from the olfactory receptor cells. Okay, this is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid. It is called cribriform plate because it has holes in it. Okay? And cribriform plate is lined by mucous membrane. And lined olfactory receptor cells. They are bipolar cells. You have two classical examples of bipolar cells. एक bipolar cells of the olfactory mucous membrane, ये, And then you have bipolar cells of the retina. Okay, let's talk about the olfactory mucous membrane. So obviously, if it's a receptor cell, if it's a neuron, a bipolar neuron, it has a peripheral process which is a dendrite, yeah, and it has a central process which is an axon. ये axon है, this is the dendrite. The dendrite at the surface of mucous membrane lining the roof of the nasal cavity. I'm talking about that mucous membrane. उस mucous membrane में ये जो dendrites हैं at the surface, at the periphery, they divide into multiple processes. These processes are called cilia, olfactory hair या olfactory cilia. आप जो भी इसका नाम देना चाहें, both are the same. They are lying at the periphery of the mucous membrane. When you smell something nice or bad or whatever, okay, a bad smell coming from a rotten egg, ये गंदे अंडे की स्मेल आपको आई, these olfactory hair या olfactory cilia, ये देख लीजिए, they get stimulated. Impulse is passed on through this peripheral process to the olfactory neuron, and from there it goes on to the axons. So the multiple axons arising from the cell bodies or receptor cell bodies, they collect together, form a nerve, olfactory nerve, that passes through the holes in the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay? When it comes out of the cribriform plate, they go and enter the olfactory bulb. Let me change the slide. ये जो olfactory bulb है ना, have a look at this. It is oval in shape, okay? And it has multiple cells, different types of cells. You have इसमें mitral cells होते हैं, इसमें tufted cells होते हैं, इसमें glomerular cells होते हैं. Different types of cells are present in this structure, which is called the olfactory bulb. But ये जो olfactory nerve fibers हैं, ये जो axons थे in receptor cells के, they collected together to form olfactory nerve fibers. They go and relay mainly in the mitral cells, which are the largest cells. उसके अलावा भी दूसरे cells में भी relay करते हैं, but it's basically the mitral cells जिसमें जाके metapharyngeal recess, pharyngeal recess की posteriorly pass करती है. ऐसा I'm talking to you. ठीक है, so इसमें जाकर रिले किए, and वहां से now ये जो हैं, they form a structure, rounded structure. इनको glomeruli कहते हैं, जिसमें जाके ये रिले करते हैं. And then वो synaptic fibers जो हैं, ये जो structure है, ये glomeruli है. ठीक है, ये mitral cell है, इनके भी axons आके यहाँ रिले करते हैं इस स्ट्रक्चर में, इसको glomeruli कहते हैं. अब ये जो mitral cells है, they synapse with these axons of the first cranial nerve. ठीक है जी, so they form a rounded structure which is called a glomeruli. इसके then the central processes of these mitral cells, they all collect together and they form what is called the optic tract. The optic tract. So axons of this, they synapse with dendrites of the mitral cells. ये basic जो है इसमें ऑप्टिक ट्रैक्ट का आगे जाके फेट डिस्कस करते हैं. अभी आपको एक चीज जो बतानी है वो ये है कि where exactly is this optic bulb and optic tract lying. This is the brain. This is the roof of the nose. This is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid, जिसके through ये nerve fibers they are passing. This optic bulb is lying on the roof of the cribriform plate. So it is lying inferior to, this is the frontal lobe of the brain. So it is lying inferior to the frontal lobe of the brain. और ये जो olfactory tract है, this is lying on top of this area, which is the sphenoid bone. ये देखिए ये pituitary gland है in the sphenoid bone. ठीक है? So this is the sphenoid bone. The optic tract is lying on the sphenoid bone. अब this is the olfactory bulb. Olfactory bulbs, ये mitral cells की जो axons हैं, they make up the olfactory tract. This olfactory tract then, when it reaches this area, which is called anterior perforated substance, at this particular site, the olfactory tract divides into two, a medial and a lateral. ठीक है? A medial, इनको स्ट्राया कहते हैं, olfactory stria कहते हैं. A medial olfactory stria, a lateral olfactory stria. अब इनका फेट क्या है अभी देखते हैं. अच्छा सॉरी, यही था. Okay, so it is, ये देख लीजिए, anterior perforated substance. It divides into a medial olfactory stria, a lateral olfactory stria. This is the frontal lobe. This is the temporal lobe. ये देख लीजिए, ये frontal lobe है और ये temporal lobe है. ठीक है? Now ये जो lateral olfactory stria है ना, this goes into the temporal lobe. Temporal lobe में you have an area over here which is called the piriform cortex. Over here you have an area which is called piriform cortex. ये olfactory cortex भी होती है. This lateral olfactory stria goes and relays into the piriform cortex या olfactory cortex. This is the area that appreciates the sense of smell. So I hope you can see one thing, कि यहाँ पे now the sense of smell that started from the nose, that goes into the olfactory bulb, the tract, lateral olfactory stria into the brain. This sense does not pass through the thalamus. आपको पता है thalamus is the biggest relay station. All sensory input comes into the thalamus first. But over here you have a difference, that the sense of smell I just had to drink of water. Now what's left is the medial olfactory stria. The medial olfactory stria of the two sides, इस side की बात कर लेते हैं, passes through the anterior commissure, goes on to the olfactory stria of the opposite side. ये passes through the anterior commissure over here and goes on to the olfactory stria of the opposite side. ठीक है? Into the opposite olfactory bulb. यहाँ पे कोई क्वेश्चन है? I guess there are no questions. अब हमने करना है Occipital Triangle. One quick look at the hyoid bone. बहुत important bone है. At the level of third cervical vertebra. ठीक है? Between the mandible and the thyroid cartilage. और आपको पता है कि it's a U-shaped bone. And this is one bone that is not attached to any other bone directly. Direct कोई attachment नहीं है. Through the ligaments, through the muscles, etc. है. It is attached to different to the surrounding structures. It is attached to the spinal process को attached है. It is attached to the thyroid cartilage, so the thyroid membrane, spinal process से muscle, stylohyoid ligament, stylohyoid muscle भी है. So उसकी direct कोई भी नहीं है attachment. ये देख लीजिए, it's a U-shaped bone. इसके different parts हैं. It has a body. It has an upper horn, lesser horn, lesser cornu भी कहते हैं, ठीक है, and it has a greater horn. Okay. Body का anterior surface जो है convex है, posterior surface concave है. It is attached directly to the greater horn of the hyoid bone, lateral aspects. Greater horn you can see runs posteriorly and arising from the body of the lateral part of the body of the hyoid bone कह लें, या junction of the body and greater horn में से this projection which is called the lesser horn, ठीक है? This projects superiorly, and obviously it is attached to both the greater horn and to the body of the hyoid bone. Okay, one quick look क्योंकि ये important है at the attachments on the hyoid bone. इसमें at the upper margin of the hyoid bone you have the genioglossus, okay? But the main muscle attached to the hyoid bone is the geniohyoid, okay? And below the geniohyoid you have this muscle which is the mylohyoid. So ये दो तो main muscle and this is just an extension of the muscle, genioglossus. देख लीजिए इसका नाम hyoid नहीं है, it is genioglossus. Geniohyoid is the main muscle, then comes the mylohyoid. And at the inferior border पे strap muscles है. Medially you have the sternohyoid and laterally you have the omohyoid. बेटा ये सब muscle आपकी किताब में दिए हुए हैं, ये सब muscle आप पढ़ चुके हो, ठीक है? सिर्फ एक ये, this is just a quick recap. What is attached to the hyoid bone? क्योंकि आपसे पूछा तो यही जाता है ना कि hyoid bone पे attachments बताएं. Okay. Then comes the greater horn. Greater horn, upper border, close to the upper border. You have the middle constrictor of the pharynx, ये brown में. And midway, halfway through the greater horn. अब ये भी outer surface है बेटा, ये external surface की हम बात कर रहे हैं. इस पे ये muscle है hyoglossus, a small muscle. आपको बहुत दफा ये दिखाया है, ठीक है? Tongue का muscle है hyoglossus. And then close to the lower margin, you have the stylohyoid, and at the margin, you have the thyrohyoid. Okay? And still laterally, I mean, ये तो digastric tendon यहाँ पे attached है ना, muscle attachment तो नहीं है इसके ऊपर. फिर repeat कर देती हूँ. Greater horn close to the margin, you have the middle constrictor of the pharynx, and then you have this hyoglossus, and close to the margin you have stylohyoid, and at the margin you have the thyrohyoid. Lesser horn पे जाके देख लें, ये जो middle constrictor of the pharynx है, ये extend करता है onto the lesser horn. Plus, what is attached to the lesser horn is this ligament, stylohyoid ligament. The other end of this ligament is attached to the styloid process. So it is this stylohyoid ligament and the middle constrictor of the pharynx that extends onto the lesser horn. Now let's come to the suboccipital triangle. I don't know आपको ये चीज इतना bother क्यों कर रही है? अभी कर लेते हैं. आपको बताया था कि ये जो suboccipital muscles जो हैं, ये टेबल है आपके उसमें KLM में. ये आपने वो टेबल करनी है. Okay? अच्छा जी. The diagram that I've just projected. पहली बात तो ये है कि this is a small diagram that shows you the location of the suboccipital triangle. ठीक है? इस location में देख लीजिए कि at the nape of the neck, immediately above the root of the neck, you have this small area on either side of the midline. This is the suboccipital triangle, and this is what it is in reality. Superior nuchal line, ठीक है? इस पे trapezius और इधर sternocleidomastoid लगा हुआ है. This is the superior nuchal line. This is the inferior nuchal line. ठीक है? Let me point out the muscles, the structures in this diagram, and then one by one we'll do the boundaries of the triangle. This is the semispinalis capitis muscle. This is the other end of the semispinalis capitis, meaning when you join these two ends, this entire area is covered by the semispinalis capitis. दूसरे लफ्जों में, the roof of this triangle, the suboccipital triangle, the roof is formed by the semispinalis capitis. Then comes these two muscles, these twin muscles. The rectus capitis posterior minor, this is the smaller of the two, and this is the rectus capitis posterior major. Here, this is the long, there it goes and gets attached to the arch. Okay? So I hope you appreciate both these muscles are attached to the inferior nuchal line. Okay? Then this is the obliquus capitis superior, or the superior oblique muscle of the skull. Yeah. And this is the obliquus capitis inferior oblique muscle. अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं इनकी बाउंड्रीज पे, इवन दो आई होप कि आपको समझ तो आ गई होगी. Supromedial boundary, this one, rectus capitis posterior major. Minor को इसकी boundary बनाने में it plays no role. It is still medially placed, more medially placed. So above and medially it is bounded by rectus capitis posterior major. Above and laterally, supralateral, it is formed by superior oblique, this superior oblique muscle or obliquus superior. Okay? Inferiorly, below and inferiorly, yeah. This is the inferior oblique, obliquus capitis inferior, yeah, inferior oblique. ये इसकी floor है. You can see this grayish structure. This grayish structure is basically posterior atlanto-occipital membrane plus this bony part. This is the posterior arch of the atlas. Yeah. Okay. Atlas is first cervical vertebra. So the floor is formed by the posterior atlanto-occipital, sorry, ये posterior atlanto-occipital membrane plus the posterior arch of the first cervical vertebra atlas. Roof मैंने आपको बता दिया था, ये semi-spinalis capitis extending from here to here. अब इसके contents क्या हैं? Contents are very important. एक तो इसके contents में vertebral artery है, इसमें suboccipital nerve भी आती है, ठीक है? Vertebral artery, suboccipital nerve. एक चीज जो ये लोग मिस करते हैं, that is the venous plexus, suboccipital plexus of veins, वो भी यहीं आता है, and this venous plexus then develops into a vein which is called a vertebral vein. Okay, that is how the vertebral vein is formed. अभी तक ठीक है? Do I need to repeat anything better? Are you with me? Thank you. Hazel, thank you. Anybody else? Anybody has a question? It seems कि नहीं है. Good, I'm glad. Okay, आगे चलते हैं. अब इसके individual muscles पे आ जाती हूँ, even though I don't think कि आपको something very petty, लेकिन बहरहाल मैं इसको करवा देती हूँ. बच्चों वाली चीज है ना. ये rectus capitis posterior majorly, spine of second cervical vertebra, यहाँ से ये spine है, second cervical vertebra, ठीक है? Inferior nuchal line यहाँ पे is attached to the inferior nuchal line. Medial aspect पे तो rectus capitis posterior minor attached था, ठीक है? तो ये lateral part पे ये attach हो गया. अब आ जाते हैं minor पे भी कर लें. Posterior spinous process. Sorry, I'm sorry. C2 का spinous process से भी आ रहा है. Major. C1 जो है ना वो posterior arch of the atlas. C1 vertebra उसकी posterior arch से it is receiving its attachment and goes on to insert at the inferior nuchal line. Medial part the inferior nuchal line. ये occipital bone का, ये देख लीजिए, ये सारी occipital bone है बेटा. This is the superior nuchal line. This is the inferior nuchal line. ठीक है? Then comes this muscle which is the superior oblique. Yeah. This is from the transverse process of first cervical vertebra. Atlas के transverse process से start होती है. It goes and attaches to the occipital bone here. In this area, between the superior nuchal line and the inferior nuchal line. That means over here, somewhere over here. This is the superior nuchal line, this is the inferior nuchal line. This area में this goes and gets inserted. ये inferior oblique है. The obliquus capitis inferior starts from the posterior tubercle, posterior arch of C2. ठीक है? और ये यहाँ पे starts from here, ends at C1. Transverse process of C1 पे जाके खत्म होता है. So basically it is running between C2, transverse process of C1 and spine of C2, posterior arch जो है C2. Okay, and these muscles are supplied by the first occipital nerve जो है इससे C1 के फाइबर. जी any other question? और बताइए, do we have any questions regarding this? Any questions regarding muscle attachment? नहीं है, no ma'am, that's fine, that's good. अब और क्या करना है? 12th cranial nerve करवा दूं या pharynx करना है? You got to tell me. है तो काफी कुछ करने को. Pharynx करवा दो, glands भी करवा दो. Glands दोनों करना चाहते हो? Submandibular, sublingual या just one gland? Submandibular, okay. Anji Maru, Q1 means what? अच्छा करवा देती हूँ, submandibular करवा देती हूँ. Okay, mistake से हो गया, no problem, no problem. Submandibular gland. देखो बेटा, almond shaped है. इसकी लोकेशन देख लीजिए, ये mandible का body of the mandible है, ये scaphoid the border है. This is the ramus of the mandible. ठीक है, this is the body of the mandible. The submandibular gland is partly hidden behind the body of the mandible and partly it projects below the body of the mandible. किस हिस्से में? The posterior half of the body. ठीक है, और यहाँ पे देख लीजिए, ये indented है या notched है because this is where the mylohyoid muscle is. ये mylohyoid muscle है बेटा. So part of the gland is below the or superficial to the mylohyoid and part of the gland is above the mylohyoid. So this is the deep part of the gland which is above the mylohyoid. And please note that the duct of the submandibular gland arises from the deep part. Okay, ये जो duct है ना submandibular gland की, this is around 5 centimeters long, and as I just told you, arises from the deep part of the gland. अब यहाँ पे ये देख लीजिए that this duct is running on the hyoglossus. ये duct है white color की जो है ना, this is the duct of the submandibular gland. It is running on the surface, on the outer surface of this muscle, which is the hyoglossus. ये जो rectangular सा muscle है, ठीक है? So it is running on the surface of the hyoglossus muscle. और ये भी देख लीजिए कि lingual, this is the lingual gland. Now to begin with, the lingual gland is above the duct. यहाँ देख लीजिए, और ये जो 12th cranial nerve है, ये lingual nerve है. Above the duct is the lingual nerve. Below the duct is the 12th cranial nerve, hypoglossal. ये देख लीजिए, ठीक है? But then what happens is कि ये जो lingual nerve है ना, this hooks below the duct and then goes up and supplies the tongue, muscles of the tongue. Lingual है ना, तो वो tongue के muscles को ही supply करेगी ना बेटा. मैं इसको फिर repeat कर देती हूँ. ये submandibular gland की duct है, ठीक है? Running on the surface of hyoglossus. Now, To begin with, ये जो lingual nerve है, this is superior to the duct. ये देख लीजिए, this is the duct. The lingual nerve is superior to the duct. This is the hypoglossal nerve, once again running on the surface of the hyoglossus muscle. This 12th cranial nerve is inferior to the submandibular duct. So hyoglossus के surface पे तीन structures run कर रहे हैं. From above downwards, you have the lingual nerve, the submandibular duct, and the 12th cranial nerve, which is the hypoglossal nerve. This lingual nerve then hooks below the duct and supplies fibers, sensory fibers to the tongue. It also supplies fibers to the submandibular and sublingual glands. Up duct, still continuing with the duct opens on either ये frenulum of the tongue है. The duct opens on either side of the frenulum of the tongue. जिस area पे वो open करती है, that area is called sublingual papilla. ठीक है? So the duct opens at the sublingual papilla. अब आ जाते हैं, अभी तक ठीक है बच्चों? Do we have any questions? अभी तक do we have any questions बेटा? It seems कि नहीं है. अच्छा जी. Okay, fine. Thank you, मेरा बेटा. Thank you, Lisa. Arterial supply पे आ जाएं बेटा. Facial से main arterial supply इसकी facial से है. ये facial artery है. This gives off a submental branch. ये जो submental branch है, this goes and supplies. ये submental branch है इसकी. ये वाली. This goes and supplies this gland. ये submandibular gland. Okay, ये यहाँ से submental, ये sublingual है बेटा. Okay, venous drainage obviously facial vein में होगा और facial vein के through ये internal jugular vein में चला जाएगा. Lymphatic drainage जो है इसकी deep cervical lymph nodes पे जाती है, plus jugulo-omohyoid lymph nodes में भी जाती है. लगे हाथों मेरे ख्याल में sublingual भी. Let's go over it. Small little thing. हाँ, इसकी nerve, before I go anywhere, इसकी nerve supply is extremely important. क्योंकि ये एग्जाम में बहुत आती है. ये देख लीजिए, इसको छोड़ दीजिए, ये कौन से अराइज करती है, forget about that. Nerve supply obviously gland है, तो gland में it will supply the gland and make the gland secrete its fluid, saliva. ठीक है, इसकी secretions produce होंगी by the stimulation of the gland, of the nerve. The gland will be made to produce its secretions. That is called secretomotor. The other thing is supply is, और ये जो secretomotor है मैंने आपको बताया था, parasympathetic है. Head and neck में 4 parasympathetic ganglia है, and they are secretomotor. They make the glands secrete. Okay. दूसरे, the other type of fibers are sympathetic fibers. Sympathetic fibers coming from first segment, thoracic segment of spinal nerve T1 से आ रही हैं. They go and relay in the superior cervical ganglion. From there, postganglionic fibers, they arise and make a plexus around the facial artery, which is a branch of the external carotid. Facial artery gets plexus bana. This plexus then goes to the submandibular. Nerves from this plexus go to the submandibular gland. Submandibular gland, they have just one job to do, and that is supply the blood vessels that are present in the submandibular gland that are supplying the submandibular gland. ये जो sympathetic है, they are basically vasomotor. ठीक है? They have no role to play in the secretion of the gland. Secretion of the gland is only produced by parasympathetic fibers. इसलिए parasympathetic fibers are also called secretomotor. अब आते हैं ये parasympathetic fibers आते कहाँ से? Parasympathetic fibers, they come from a branch of the facial nerve. To begin with, the facial nerve carries all types of nerve fibers. Then the chorda tympani separates out. Chorda tympani carries parasympathetic fibers. Chorda tympani also carries taste fibers. ठीक है? So जब भी chorda tympani का नाम सुने आप, so please remember one thing: they supply the taste fibers, and they also supply the parasympathetic secretomotor fibers. So the chorda tympani is basically a branch of facial nerve, but अब ये वही जो मैंने आपको बार-बार बताया हुआ hitchhiking fibers है. Jumping from one car into the other, and finally you reach your destination. That is the खंजराव पास. तो इसने भी खंजराव पास तक पहुंचने के लिए इसका खंजराव पास जो है, that is submandibular ganglion. So it leaves the facial nerve, runs independently for a while, and then कहाँ रन करती है जब आपको एयर करवाऊंगी तब आपको बताऊंगी. ठीक है? It then joins the lingual nerve. अगली कार, the next car is the lingual nerve. So basically lingual nerve के अपने fibers नहीं हैं, they are the fibers of the patient. So they join the lingual nerve, and with the lingual nerve, अब lingual nerve के साथ ये is hang कर रहा है submandibular ganglion. Hanging from the lingual nerve is the submandibular ganglion. These fibers, the red fibers, please trace these red fibers. These red fibers then go and relay in the submandibular ganglion. Okay? So these fibers of the chorda tympani, they go and relay in the submandibular ganglion. From their postganglionic fibers, they arise and they supply the gland, submandibular gland. Okay? And obviously, the parasympathetic fibers, so they provide secretomotor fibers to this gland. The stimulation of these secretomotor fibers would produce secretions. Obviously, secretomotor का मतलब ये होता है कि they produce secretions. Any questions? समझ आ गया? बहुत important है बेटा. अगर if you still have any doubts, please अभी clear कर लो. And one thing, this entire pathway is given somewhere in your book, yes. But this picture, in the newer editions, this picture is missing. It used to be present in the older editions, but in the newer editions, this picture is not. अच्छा मैं दोबारा repeat कर देती हूँ Lisa. I'll repeat it again, one by one. ठीक है? अच्छा जी, sorry. पानी पी रही थी. Let's start with the secretomotor fibers. Okay? Secretomotor fibers travel with the facial nerve. They are parasympathetic fibers that travel with the facial nerve. The parasympathetic fibers in the facial nerve, they leave the facial nerve via its branch and travel in its branch, which is called chorda tympani. So the parasympathetic fibers present in the facial nerve, they leave the facial nerve and run in the branch called chorda tympani. So the chorda tympani nerve is basically a branch of the facial nerve that carries parasympathetic fibers. They are also taste fibers. Okay, chorda tympani is associated with one sense, and that is taste. So जब भी taste का जिक्र आए, the first nerve that should come in your mind is chorda. So the chorda tympani leaves the facial nerve and then it runs with the lingual nerve. Yeah, it is running with the lingual nerve. Okay, hanging from the lingual nerve is the submandibular ganglion, a parasympathetic ganglion. Okay, we've done the pterygopalatine, we've done the otic ganglion, we've done the ciliary ganglion. This is the last ganglion, fourth ganglion. Head ne kya aapko bataya tha, you have four ganglia, parasympathetic ganglia. This is the fourth one. So the chorda tympani leaves the facial, joins the lingual. The lingual has a submandibular gland hanging by it. The fibers, parasympathetic fibers, relay in this submandibular ganglion, which is a parasympathetic ganglia. From the submandibular ganglion, postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they arise and supply the submandibular ganglion. Okay, and stimulation of these parasympathetic fibers will make this submandibular gland produce its secretions. Then comes this sympathetic fibers from the first thoracic segment of spinal cord. These sympathetic fibers relay in the superior cervical ganglion. From there, postganglionic sympathetic fibers make a plexus around the facial artery and its branches. And we've just discussed that the branches of facial artery supply submandibular gland. Yeah. So these sympathetic fibers, they go and supply the blood vessels, the arteries that supply the submandibular gland, namely the branches, submental branch of the facial. अब ये supply किस किस्म की है? This is simply vasomotor, vasoconstrictor fibers. Gland की functioning को directly कोई effect नहीं है. Indirectly बेटा effect इसलिए है because the blood supply of the gland determines its secretion. The blood supply of the gland is not present. If it is reduced, obviously, the secretions from the gland, they are also reduced. They are not present. ठीक है, so indirect तो है, लेकिन direct supply to the gland only comes from parasympathetic secretomotor fibers. Gee, anything else related to the submandibular gland, especially its nerve supply, वो आपको, I know it's creating problems. बेटा ये सब आपकी किताब में दिया हुआ है. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much. What next? You still have about, say, around 10, 11 minutes. Anything else you want to discuss? You want me to repeat in these 11 minutes? Pharynx का कौन सा part repeat कर दूं? Or are you okay with pharynx? Okay, go ahead. Hypoglossal nerve, कोई मसला नहीं है, अभी हो जाएगा. Yeah, 12th cranial nerve. 12th cranial nerve, remember this is a purely motor cranial nerve. Purely. Okay? leaves the skull through the hypoglossal canal. This is the inside of the skull. This is the 12th cranial nerve, leaving through the hypoglossal canal. Yeah. Okay. As soon as it comes out of the skull, it is joined by this first cervical nerve fibers. अभी आपने देखा था suboccipital triangle में C1 run कर रही थी, और that is right at the base of the skull. ठीक है? So ये जो C1 के fibers हैं, they are joined. This orange या brown is the hypoglossal nerve, and the yellow fibers are the fibers of C1. ठीक है? अब ये जो C1 के fibers हैं, they go and they are motor fibers. Part of them are motor fibers that go and supply the genohyoid and hypohyoid. इन दो muscles को supply करती है. Okay? Sorry, I'm so sorry. Then you have these fibers of C2. ये जो C2 के fibers हैं, इनमें मोटर भी है, इनमें सेंसरी भी है. जो C2 के sensory fibers हैं, they are retrograde fibers. They ascend. Okay? Pass through this hypoglossal canal and enter the skull. So from outside the C2 fibers go into the skull. ये sensory fibers of C2 की बात कर रहे हैं. Skull में what purpose is this nerve serving? C2's fibers of C2 that are sensory in nature enter the skull and supply the dura mater in the posterior cranial fossa. Okay, so इनको meningeal nerve कहते हैं. The floor of the posterior cranial fossa. ये देखिए, ये लिखा हुआ है, ये C2 के fibers है. C1 के मैंने आपको बता दिया था कि जी बेटे. ओके कोमल, मैं अभी बता देती हूँ. अभी तो मैंने कितनी दफा रिपीट किया, मैं फिर बता देती हूँ. Just let me wind up this thing. बाकी वही 12th cranial nerve, ये ठीक है, runs down between the internal carotid artery and ये internal carotid artery है, this is the internal jugular vein running between them. This is the 12th cranial nerve. Then as it ये 12th cranial nerve है, as it runs down, it passes inferior to the digastric, both the bellies of the digastric. Okay? And you can see it crossing the internal carotid artery. It is crossing the external carotid artery. Okay? It is also crossing the loop of the lingual nerve, lingual artery. ये lingual artery, ये देख लीजिए, ये lingual artery, yes, का loop, इसको भी cross कर रहा है. Okay? And यहाँ पे देख लीजिए, अभी मैंने आपको पहले भी दिखाया है. This is the 12th cranial nerve, and this is crossing the hyoglossus muscle. यहाँ पे it passes deep to the, अब यहाँ पे दिखाया नहीं हुआ, it passes deep to the mylohyoid, and finally it breaks up into branches. These branches supply the muscles of the tongue, all the muscles of the tongue except palatoclastus, which is basically a muscle of the palate. ठीक है? अब मैंने यहाँ mention किया lingual branches. That means branches to the tongue. ये lingual nerve की branches नहीं है बेटा. These are simply lingual branches. ये चीज बहुत important है. This is a very commonly asked question. How do you test the injury to the hypoglossal nerve? You just ask the person to push the tongue out. if it's a right-sided lesion, right-sided nerve damage है, that means कि ये जो right side पे, ये देख लीजिए, इधर देख लीजिए, the tongue is smooth. यहाँ पे muscles, since they are not getting its supply from the nerve, the muscles are paralyzed, and when they are paralyzed, they undergo atrophy. So this side of the tongue, this half of the tongue is not smooth looking, uneven सी है, ठीक है? Now this is the weaker side of the tongue. This side of the tongue is normal. Result क्या होगा? As a result, the normal side will push the tongue towards the opposite side, towards the weaker side, with the result that the tongue will be deviated to the injured side. So अगर right side की lesion है, the right side पे tongue deviate कर जाएगी, या it will move to the right side when the person pushes the tongue out. अगर left side की weakness है, when the person sticks the tongue out, the tongue will deviate to the left side. जिस side की lesion है, उसी side पे tongue deviate कर जाएगी. Syllabus में आपको बता देती हूँ बेटा. Syllabus में nose and first cranial nerve, joints of the neck, pharynx, paranasal sinuses, suboccipital triangle and hyoid bone, tongue and 12th cranial nerve, salivary glands में submandibular and sublingual nerve glands. I'm sorry. मैं फिर repeat कर देती हूँ. Nose and first cranial nerve, joints of the neck, pharynx, paranasal sinuses, suboccipital triangle and hyoid bone, tongue and 12th cranial nerve, submandibular and sublingual glands. Any other question? Anything else? You still have 4 minutes. On 4 minutes में, what do you want me to do? What else? What other questions do you want me to answer? वो अभी पूछ लो. कल मुझे ये नहीं कहना कि out of question था. मैंने आपको, I've read out everything, and I know one thing: every word has been covered by 3 teachers. मेरी एक बात याद रखना बेटा, since आपके syllabus, आपकी book में everything is given, all you have to do is look for it. बहुत सी चीजें, ये जो diagrams के नीचे captions होती हैं, बहुत कुछ उसमें भी लिखा हुआ होता है बेटा, वो captions पढ़ लिया करो, because they are part of your syllabus. जो diagram, जो drawings explain की होती है ना नीचे, उनको भी पढ़ लिया करो. बहुत से relations जो हैं वो आपको उधर नजर आते हैं, वहां मिल जाते हैं आपको, ठीक है? चलो जी. Any other questions before we wind up? 2 minutes to go. Still 2 minutes to go. क्योंकि अगर अभी नहीं पूछोगे तो बेटा फिर कल जैसा भी होगा आपको खुद ही भुगतना पड़ेगा. Extrinsic or intrinsic back muscles are included. उनके नाम सिर्फ आपको पता होना चाहिए, बस. Just remember the names. उनकी attachments वगैरह छोड़ो, they are not important. ठीक है? इसमें आपके extensor muscles of the back हैं, flexor muscles को front of neck, anterior aspect of the neck के साथ cover किए थे. इसमें extensor muscles आ जाते हैं, उसमें intrinsic extrinsic दोनों आ जाएंगे. सिर्फ नाम कर लें और देख लेंगे किस लेयर में कौन सा मसल है. 3 लेयर्स होती है, सुपरफिशियल होती है, मिडिल होती है, डीप होती है, और इन मसल्स के नाम होते हैं. ये बेसिकली रेक्टस स्पाइन ही है आपकी. Just remember the names. That's about all. और कुछ नहीं है? Okay. In the last minute, if there's nothing else, तो ठीक है. Good. I wish you all the very best of luck for your substage tomorrow. And उसके बाद tomorrow, after key discussion, inshallah, I'll do it myself. Inshallah, we'll start on with the syllabus of the next substage. Last substage, that will be. Okay? Khuda Hafiz and inshallah. Khuda Hafiz and best.